Caden didn't mean to find the ancient ruin, and he definitely didn't mean to activate it. He also didn't mean to get caught by the Zerg. In fact, the only thing Caden did mean to do was not die on this planet. It was a simple goal. He was a simple man. He'd been running for days now, cutting through the dense, overgrown jungles of Vithos 9 like some half-baked, poorly written action hero from a trashy holofilm. At least he wasn't dead yet. Right on cue, a scream ripped through the air, making the hairs on his neck stand on end. It wasn't human, and it certainly wasn't friendly. Caden's legs burned, his breath ragged, but he kept going. Through thick vines, under hanging, twisting branches that looked as though they were about to strangle him, and into a stretch of ground so soft it was more like running through pudding. The Zerg, always the hunters, were closing in. The sound of their chitinous feet tapping the ground sent waves of panic through him. Caden glanced over his shoulder, his boots slipping in the mud, and slammed into something hard. He gasped, looking up at what could only be described as a freaking monument. It was a huge, jagged structure made of sleek alien metal and ancient stone, covered in creeping, luminous green moss. The door, or maybe it was the entrance, loomed ahead like an ominous black mouth, hungry for whatever idiot wandered too close. For a split second, Caden thought about turning back. He really did. But the Zerg were right there, and running into an ancient ruin didn't seem so bad compared to the alternative. He reached out, and before his brain could fully process the stupidity of it, he shoved open the door. It creaked like an old coffin lid. The silence inside was almost unnatural, and then, of course, a voice boomed from nowhere. "Welcome, guest of the hive." Caden froze. "Are you, seriously?" He was talking to the voice now, because if you couldn't talk to yourself in a situation like this, what kind of world were we even living in? "You gotta be kidding me." "State your intentions," the voice continued, oblivious to Caden's disbelief. He stared at the black void in front of him, hands on his hips, trying to make sense of the absurdity of his situation. "I'm just, trying not to die. Can't you see I'm a little busy?" A low hum vibrated through the floor beneath him, and then a blinding blue light flared out from the walls. Not ideal. But before he could curse fate again, the floor beneath his feet shifted, and Caden fell straight down through an opening. "A trap door, great," he muttered. "I always wanted to be sucked into an ancient alien chamber full of danger and doom. It's the latest craze." When Caden landed, he didn't die. Which, considering his luck, was honestly a miracle. He groaned as he picked himself up from a heap of what felt like really old, dusty tech. He brushed himself off, blinking as his eyes adjusted to the low, flickering light that illuminated the room in strange shades of green and purple. The place felt old. Really old. The kind of old where even the dust had dust. The room was a circular chamber, its walls covered in ancient symbols, all of them alien and unreadable, except for a few that Caden could have sworn he recognized. They resembled human symbols from Earth, symbols that were almost the same, but not quite. Coincidence? Maybe. But something told him it wasn't. Something about this place felt off. Caden took a few cautious steps forward. The floor beneath him was made of solid metal plates that clicked with every step, and each time he moved, the echoes bounced off the walls in a way that made him think this was one hell of a weird tomb. He looked around, his brow furrowing as he tried to figure out what this place had been. A hidden Zerg facility? An ancient human outpost? His hand brushed against a control panel, and immediately a holographic projection sprang to life in front of him, illuminating the space in a shimmering, ghostly light. It was a body. No, not just any body. Several bodies, all preserved in stasis, their forms suspended mid-air in cylindrical pods. The figures were humanoid in shape but had strange, insectoid features, elongated limbs, black exoskeletal armor, and eyes that shimmered with a cold, alien glow. Caden stepped closer, his pulse quickening. These weren't just random bodies. He recognized the markings, Zerg, he muttered under his breath, but these weren't just Zerg. The details were all wrong. Their skin was too smooth, their limbs too delicate. These were the bodies of creatures that had been engineered, altered, perfected. No way. Caden stepped back in horror, his mind trying to catch up with what his eyes were telling him. This isn't possible. The hologram shifted again, this time showing a woman in a lab coat, standing among the suspended figures. Her face was worn and tired, but she exuded a quiet authority as she interacted with the creatures. Then, the footage slowed down. The woman reached out toward one of the pods. A small, dark figure was inside, twitching. It wasn't human, not by a long shot. The hybrid was alive. I knew it, Caden whispered, his voice tight with disbelief. I knew the Zerg were hiding something. The more he watched, the clearer it became. These were not just experiments, they were weapons. Soldiers crafted from the DNA of both the insectoid Zerg and something far darker. He thought about the rumors he'd heard from the last surviving humans on this planet. Whispered tales of a race of creatures that had been bred to be the perfect soldiers, unstoppable in every way, xenomorphs, and now, it seemed that the Zerg had created them, or at least, had tried to. His thoughts were interrupted by a sudden click. Caden whipped around, his heart hammering in his chest. The walls had shifted again, and in the shadows, a figure emerged from a dark doorway. You shouldn't be here, the figure said in a low voice. Caden's eyes went wide. The figure was humanoid, with the unmistakable posture of a soldier. But there was something about the voice that struck him as wrong. Too smooth. Too practiced. A smile curved the figure's lips as they stepped closer, revealing their identity, a human. But not just any human. The man in front of him had been a part of the resistance. Caden knew him from years ago. Their relationship had always been complicated, but this was something else. Rory? Caden asked, confused. What the hell are you doing here? Rory's smile didn't falter. I could ask you the same thing. You know, you always were the curious one. Caden's stomach sank. Rory. The same man who had betrayed him all those years ago, setting him up as a scapegoat for a crime he hadn't committed. The same man who had sworn allegiance to the resistance. What are you really here for? Caden demanded, his voice low. Rory's smile faltered, just for a second. Then it returned, sharper, colder. To make sure the truth doesn't come out. There are some things better left buried, Caden. You shouldn't have come here. The floor hummed again, and Caden realized, too late, that he'd walked into a trap. Caden's heart pounded in his chest as he stared at Rory, his mind racing. The betrayal, the gut-wrenching realization that the man who had once been his closest ally in the human resistance was now standing in front of him, cold and indifferent, felt like a punch to the gut. He'd known something was off about Rory's disappearance all those years ago, but this was beyond anything he could have anticipated. The low hum of the chamber was almost deafening now, a constant buzz that seemed to vibrate through his very bones. Caden glanced around, trying to gauge his options. The walls were closing in, the air was thick with a strange energy, like the room itself was alive. He was trapped, you know, Caden said, forcing a dry chuckle past his lips. I was hoping I could be wrong about this. But here we are. Just like old times. You, with your smug little smile, and me, doing all the hard work while you sit back and pull the strings. His voice dripped with sarcasm, but inside, his mind was already mapping out his escape. Rory's smile didn't fade, but his eyes narrowed. You always were too perceptive for your own good, Caden. But you never understood the bigger picture, did you? The Resistance was never going to win. We weren't fighting to save humanity, we were fighting to survive. There's a difference. Caden's hands clenched into fists. You're saying everything was a lie. The Resistance, the war, all of it? He took a step closer, his voice rising. You think this, he gestured around the chamber, at the horrific hybrids suspended in their pods, is some kind of answer? This is a nightmare. Maybe, Rory replied coolly, but it's the only way forward. These creatures, the Zerg didn't create them. We did. Well, they did at first, but we refined them. Perfected them. A sick feeling churned in Caden's stomach. Perfected them, he echoed, almost incredulously. You're insane. They're monsters. You can't control them. Rory's smile twisted into something darker. That's where you're wrong, Caden. We control them now. They're our soldiers. Our army. The perfect soldiers, genetically engineered, designed to adapt, to evolve, to survive in any environment. You think the Zerg had control? No. They were just tools. Tools we could use, tools we could make better. Caden took another step back, his mind scrambling. And the Zerg? What about them? Rory's gaze shifted to the suspended bodies, and for a brief moment, there was a flicker of something that almost looked like regret. The Zerg were part of the plan. They were the ones who started the experiments. But they were too weak. Too unpredictable. They couldn't maintain control of the hybrids once they were made. But we've learned from their mistakes. Caden felt a cold knot form in his gut as he realized the full scope of what Rory was saying. The hybrid creatures weren't just the next phase of warfare, they were part of a twisted, deeply calculated plan to reshape the galaxy. And Caden had just stumbled right into the heart of it. I should have known you were involved in this, Caden muttered. All that talk about fighting for humanity, and now it turns out you're just another tool, only this time, it's you doing the exploiting. Rory didn't flinch. It's not exploitation if you're building the future, Caden. Humanity's future. He turned, his gaze sweeping across the dark chamber, as if he could see the future unfolding before him. You don't understand. This isn't just about power, it's about evolution. The galaxy is changing, and if we want to survive, we have to adapt. The old ways are dead. Caden's mind raced. He thought about the humans left on the planet, those who had escaped the war, those who had been trying to rebuild a new society. They had no idea what was really going on beneath their feet. They had no idea that the hybrid creatures, the xenomorph-like horrors, were not only real but being bred for war against them. Suddenly, there was a sharp hiss. The room shook. It wasn't a small tremor. The walls rumbled, the very air seemed to crackle with energy. Rory's face twisted with concern. No. Not now. What the hell is that? Caden demanded, his eyes darting around. Rory's face was grim. You've triggered the containment breach. The hybrids, they're waking up. He turned toward the far wall, his expression hardening as he punched in a series of commands on a nearby terminal. The screen flickered to life, displaying a series of alarming red warnings. Damn it! I was hoping to avoid this. Caden's heart skipped a beat. He could feel the temperature in the room rising. The air was thick with a low, pulsing hum that felt more alive than mechanical. A sound, sharp and alien, echoed from deep within the facility. It was the unmistakable hiss of something very angry and very alive. You did this, Caden spat. You triggered it. You let them out. Rory's eyes narrowed. You don't understand. These hybrids, they're controlled now. They can't escape. Not without my permission. Good, Caden said, his voice like steel. Then you better not give them permission, because if you do, we're all dead. Rory didn't respond, his hands frantically typing in commands, but the system didn't respond. The alarms grew louder, the walls flashing red. The creatures were waking up, and with each passing second, the chances of survival were slipping away. Caden, you need to get out of here. Now, Rory said, his voice uncharacteristically strained. He didn't look at Caden. His attention was fixed on the control panel, his fingers flying across the keys in a desperate attempt to override the systems. If you don't, we're both going to die. There's no time. But Caden wasn't listening. His eyes were fixed on the pods, where he could see the creatures inside twitching, their limbs twitching, their eyes opening. You can't stop them, Caden said, his voice low and steady. This is bigger than you. You can't control this. Rory turned to face him, his expression dark and resigned. I don't have a choice. The room shook again, more violently this time. A loud screech pierced the air, followed by the unmistakable sound of something breaking, glass, or perhaps something even worse. The pods cracked open one by one, and the hybrids inside began to stir. No! No! Rory shouted, but it was too late. The first hybrid emerged, its long, insectoid limbs clicking against the metal floor. It was like nothing Caden had ever seen, a monstrous, twisted creature with the body of an insect and the sleek, predatory features of a xenomorph. Its black eyes locked on Caden, and for a moment, time seemed to slow. The creature hissed, a terrible, shrill sound, and then it lunged. Caden didn't hesitate. He dove toward the control panel, grabbed the nearest weapon, an old pulse rifle, and fired. The creature's screech filled the air, but the blast didn't stop it. It kept coming, faster than Caden could aim, its limbs moving with terrifying precision. In the chaos, Caden's mind raced. There was no stopping this now. No way to contain the creatures. No way out. All he could do was fight, but even as he fired, even as he tried to fight back, Caden knew one thing: he had made a terrible mistake. The truth about the hybrids, about the Zerg, about Rory, it was all bigger than him. And now, there was no going back.